McPro24fps doesn't have the most easily pronounced name. I think if this was my app, I'd consider shortening it to something like Pro24, perhaps. You know what, I'm just going to call it Pro24 in this video. You guys okay with that? Okay, cool. Anyway, this is a great app with a depth of features not matched by any other Android video recording app, including Filmic Pro. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing on iOS to match this either. But like the name, it is a little bit complicated. So I'm going to go through the features and give you an idea of how to best use this app. The Pro24 interface was recently given a makeover. In fact, on the same day I released the last video about this app, instantly making that video out of date. Thanks for letting me know, Pro24 people. Just kidding. It definitely needed some reworking though. So this is what it looks like now. And I do think this is a big improvement. Like many other apps, we have the exposure controls on the left of the screen and the focus controls on the right. So let's first look at the exposure controls. In auto mode, the plus and minus symbols can be tapped to adjust the auto exposure level, brighter or darker. Like if you just want to use auto exposure but don't like how it's turning out. For example, if you find this shot of the room too bright, you can tap the minus sign and adjust it. It's still in auto though. Now, if I'm happy with this level of exposure, I can tap the padlock icon and lock it in its position. Below the plus and minus signs is a box showing you the ISO and shutter speed settings being used by your camera. So if we unlock exposure and move the camera, we can see those settings change as the light changes. But if I tap the padlock and now move the camera, those settings are fixed. The last icon here is the big capital M. Tap that to enable manual exposure. The wheel is to adjust ISO. Meanwhile, the shutter speed is contained in a box with 3 arrows. Up and down adjust the shutter speed. Because Pro24 is set to shoot at 30 frames per second, this number now moves in multiples of 30. 30, 60, 120, 240 and so on. But if we want it to move in multiples of 50, we tap the right arrow. The reason we might want to do this is to remove that strobing effect we get from artificial lights. So in countries where the electricity is 50 Hz, switch shutter to multiples of 50. The box above the shutter box contains the current ISO setting. Tapping the arrows up and down adjusts the ISO in bigger jumps, 100, 150, 200, 300 and so on. Best practice here is to get roughly where you want with the arrows and then use the wheel for fine tuning. Below the exposure settings are 2 buttons for live analytics overlays. The left button enables zebra stripes, black stripes on white for underexposed and white stripes on black for overexposed areas. The right button toggles on the false color overlay. This gives you a heat map of the whole image, with hot or red being overexposed and cold or blue being underexposed. As you can see, as I bring down the ISO, the heat map becomes bluer. I think this is how they shot A Scanner Darkly. Joke. On the right of the screen is the focus control. At first, focus is set to auto. You can tell as the big letter A button is orange. While in auto mode, focus will constantly adjust live, even while recording. In this mode, the control wheel becomes a focus meter, letting you know the current focal distance. You can see it moving as you aim the camera at different objects. The next button down switches Pro24 to tap focus mode. When enabled, tapping the screen will set focus on the object tapped, and this works even while recording, so it's actually possible to make a cheeky little focus pull using this method. To switch to manual focus, tap the button with the big M. The focus meter now expands to become the focus control wheel. Plus, you get a series of new buttons. Swiping up and down on the wheel will manually adjust the focus. The 2 buttons with identical arrows can be used to set the upper and lower focus limit. Basically, these buttons are for performing manual and auto focus pulls. but this is probably an advanced function we can look at later in another video. Right at the bottom of the focus mode buttons is a button with a plus sign. Now tap this to switch to zoom mode. Now the wheel goes green and will control zoom. Below the focus and zoom controls, you will find 3 buttons, or 4 if you have an Samsung S9 or S10, a cog for settings and a microphone for audio. But to set frame rate and resolution, we need to tap the camera icon. And setting frame rate and resolution is somewhat more complicated in Pro24 than with other apps. The app's current frame rate and resolution setting is listed at the top. Tap this to open up another menu. The left and right arrows allow you to select frame rate. Here I'm going to select 24 FPS. After selecting frame rate, you can select resolution from a list below. Scroll through the list to find your desired resolution. Most have a frame ratio in brackets beside them, so I'm going to select the good old 1920 by 1080, which is of course a 16 by 9 ratio. Note that after you select frame rate, until you also select a resolution from the list below, the frame rate won't change. Once resolution is selected, the app takes you out of the menu and back to the main screen. At the top of the menu, you can switch between 2 options, with GPU or without GPU. I've never seen a video app offer this before, and it's features like this which will appeal to those who like lots of settings to tinker with. GPU stands for Graphics Processing Unit, and some features need to use the GPU while others need it switched off. This means that certain features are actually incompatible with each other. For example, on my device, I cannot shoot 120 frames per second and use the GPU gamma curves at the same time. Every device has its limits, but Pro24 allows you the most freedom to experiment with different options and push those limits. And this is where the complexity of the app pays off, if you're prepared to put in the time to explore what your device can achieve. So, if I select without GPU, extra frame rates now become available. You can see that these frame rates are in red. And this essentially means using them comes with a degree of uncertainty, and that is the same for other settings marked red throughout the app. To record video, simply press the button in the top right corner of the app. The time counter is placed within this button, so once you tap record, the counter should start ticking. And it also starts to let you know how much memory you've used in megabytes. Another feature unique to Pro24 is the dropped frames counter right next to the record button. When recording digital video in any devices, dropped frames can occur. A dropped frame is when the device loses video information or is simply unable to complete the capture of the information. Then one or more frames are dropped and they just go missing, and this can result in jerky, jittery footage as the missing frames become apparent. Your device is more likely to drop frames when the system is put under pressure. For example, recording at high frame rates, at high bit rates, at high resolutions, or when using a log color profile. In this example, my phone didn't drop any frames, but actually previously it dropped 4 frames in about 15 seconds. And this is recording at 24 frames per second at quite a reasonable resolution, only HD, but now when I switch to 4K resolution at the same 30 frames per second and same fixed frame rate switched on, I get a lot of dropped frames, 44 over the same duration. Now let's see what happens when I switch to a very high frame rate. Uh-oh, my phone just starts going crazy and I have to switch out of auto exposure and focus to stabilize it a bit. But now, once I press record, the dropped frame counter shows me my phone really struggles at this frame rate. But you can see that this dropped frames counter is a great insight into the capabilities of your device. At the bottom left of the screen, there is a set of 3 icons. The padlock icon locks white balance at the current settings. Next to the padlock is the white balance button itself. Tap that to open up the white balance setting. White balance is in auto by default. To switch to manual, tap the red bar where it says auto. Now you can select from a menu, which includes Manual. If you tap Manual, you now get 3 different ways to set white balance manually. The white balance box allows you to move this little circle anywhere in the box. Moving from top left to bottom right adjusts the tint, while moving top right to bottom left adjusts the Kelvin number. On the right of the screen, you get a list of temperatures in Kelvin, and you simply tap the desired number. For example, if you're using artificial lights and you know the temperature of the light, like for example 3600 K, then you can just tap that button. There's also tint and saturation settings to adjust using these sliders. Now, usually all we want to do is make sure white balance doesn't change during the shot. So just tap that padlock button and start shooting. Once you are in manual mode, you can save your current settings by tapping that plus sign at the bottom of the settings box. Name your preset and save. That setting is now added to the list of settings in the menu. You can just delete this preset if you want to by selecting it, and you should get a minus sign at the bottom left of the box. So just tap to delete the saved setting. The next button in this row opens up the Log Profile Manager, that's what I'm calling it anyway, and plus some other settings which alter the look of your video. There's really a lot of settings here, including 2 complete menus of color profiles for log and other such gamma curves, tone map curves and all that. So using the arrows at the bottom, you can switch between them: tone map, curve, GPU curve, NR and sharpness, and extra. Now, I asked the developer of the app what was the difference between tone map, curve and GPU curve, and he said this. So raw comes before tone map, comes before 8-bit, comes before GPU. So I asked if this meant that the tone map curve is better quality than GPU, and he said that it should be. So you can try that out and see for yourself. When you select a preset setting, Pro24 gives you a list of the settings which make up this curve, and all this is editable. So you just tap the setting and a slider appears on the right. Smartphones tend to add a lot of sharpening to the video they produce, and this is to make it look crisper, but it also makes it look a bit more digital. If you want your video to look more like film, you can reduce the sharpness. So just tap the red bar where it says off and an empty menu appears. So just tap empty, and now you can change these sharpness settings, increasing or decreasing sharpness. Pro24 even allows you to add a little bit of blur, but make sure to add a blur radius or you won't see any difference. The extra setting here allows you to do some little bit of color grading within the app. Again, tap empty and you will access some really useful settings here. Want more detail in the shadow? Then tap shadows and use the slider to set it how you want. Again, each custom setting can be saved using the plus sign button. The button at the bottom with a mic icon next to the camera button is the audio button. Tap this to open up the audio settings menu. Here you can select the audio source, level, channels, sample rate and bitrate. Tapping the cog icon at the bottom opens up a menu called Preview. In this menu, you can make a lot of customizations to the Pro24 app. Switch on or off various meters like focus peaking and white balance. To switch lenses, tap the top left icon with an image of a smartphone and arrow. A list appears displaying all the lenses available to third-party app developers. If your smartphone has lenses that don't appear in this list, then that's most likely because the maker of your device has hidden that lens. With my Samsung S9, all the lenses in my device are available, but I know that devices with telephoto lenses, for example, often hide those lenses from app developers. To the right of the lens button is the flashlight and then the orientation button. Tap to switch between auto, then locked landscape and locked portrait. So that's it for this video. There's still quite a bit more under the hood of this app, but I will go into more detail in further videos. If you want to catch those videos as soon as published, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.